Welcome to the latest episode of The Federal's Worldly Wise, a weekly show that deconstructs trending issues in international politics. Over the last few weeks, the issue of statehood for Palestine is spreading. France, United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia have proposed recognizing Palestine as a state. In the last 3 decades or so, 147 nations out of 193 have recognized Palestinian state. Does this recognition make any difference on the ground to the nearly 8-decade-old Palestinian Israeli conflict? The statehood for Palestine is coming at a time when Israel has been bombarding Gaza for 22 months, killing an estimated 60,000 people, including civilians, many of whom are women and children. The Gaza Strip is in ruins, with residents suffering a famine like situation in the absence of basic needs like food and water. To understand the significance of Palestinian statehood, the growing recognition of Palestine from a majority of nations around the world, and whether it will help in diffusing the conflict, we are talking to the Federal's consulting editor, K.S. Dakshina Murthy, who closely follows international politics and is specialist on the subject. So thank you for joining. And our first question is, how will recognizing Palestine as a state help resolve the long-standing dispute with Israel?
It will not help directly, but at the same time, it does make a positive difference to the long-standing struggle to implement the two-state solution. Out of 193 nations under the UN umbrella, as you said, 147 have recognized Israel as a state over the last 3 decades at least. India, by the way, is one of the earliest states to recognize the state of Palestine way back in 1988. The significance of the current round of possible recognitions is because it is coming from among the most powerful group of nations, the G7. Of these, France and Britain are members of the UN Security Council. China and Russia recognized Palestine as a state way back in 1988. So that will leave only the United States isolated within the Security Council as far as this issue is concerned. It also indicates a rift within the Western allies, especially since Canada and Australia too are planning to recognize statehood for Palestine. At the United Nations, Palestine's status is neither here nor there. It holds an permanent observer position, but a non-member status. What this means is it can take part in debates, sit at important meetings, but does not have the right to vote. Israel and the United States are totally opposed to according recognition to a Palestinian state. Israel's contention is that a full-fledged Palestinian state will constantly pose a threat to the security of the Jews, while the US backs the Israeli contention. The US, of course, it recognizes the Palestinian Authority. It was a kind of an ad hoc body set up under the Oslo Peace Accords of 1993. But it does in no way does it imply that it recognizes a full-fledged state. US Vice President J.D. Vance was recently quoted as saying, Palestine does not have a functional government as the reason for not recognizing it as a state.
Okay. So the next question is, does Palestine actually satisfy the conditions required for a state? If so, why is it not recognized as one until now?
Yes, there are 4 conditions for a territory to be recognized as a state. A well-defined territory with a permanent population. It should have a functional government and should be able to engage in international relations. These are conditions that are required for any territory to be called a state. Palestine, as it stands now, more or less satisfies these 4 conditions. Under the United Nations Partition Plan of 1947, the territories of West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem were delineated for an independent Palestine as part of the two-state solution, along with an independent Israel. Though much, if not all, of the land meant for an independent Palestine is currently under the occupation of Israel, with concerted pressure, it is still possible to swing a deal, at least theoretically. For this, the US alone can make a difference. Statehood, full fledged statehood for Palestine is stuck because the US vetoes the proposal in the Security Council. In the view of the US, Israel and Palestine need to come to an understanding, which will be the basis for recognizing a Palestinian state. Well, this is a empty rhetoric as Israel has consistently refused to agree to allow statehood for Palestine. And since Palestine is not recognized by the Security Council, it is not sovereign, does not have a standing army, and its people are considered stateless. In fact, last month at a meeting in New York, some 125 nations, co chaired by France and Saudi Arabia, passed a declaration which called upon all the 193 nations, countries in the world to recognize Palestinian state and call upon Israel to stop fighting and to end the assault that's going on in Gaza. According to this declaration, the Palestinian Authority will govern the whole of Palestinian state, including Gaza for now. The Hamas will have to disband and hand over its weapons to the Palestinian Authority. See, much will come of all this, as the US and Israel boycotted the meeting. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is in fact going the other way. He has already stated that Israel will take control over Gaza, especially its security apparatus. In media interviews, he has categorically asserted that Israel will finish the job in Gaza and end the Hamas's existence there. So, and there is one more, in fact, a more radical proposal. Netanyahu is reportedly in talks with South Sudan to resettle the remaining Palestinians in Gaza. Forcible, large scale expulsion of a community is in violation of international law, but it really doesn't seem to bother the Netanyahu government. At the same time, the pressure on Israel is growing. France is expected to formally recognize Palestine in September, to be followed by Canada, Australia, and Britain. New Zealand, too, is expected to recognize the Palestinian state.
So, what is India's stand on Palestinian statehood?
India, historically was one of the first countries to recognize the Palestinian state way back in 1988. And since then, and then even earlier, from the time of when India got independence, the Nehru government, followed by the Indira Gandhi government, completely backed the Palestinian cause and was always in favor of a two-nation solution. But since 1991, when reforms happened and the Cold War ended, India's position too changed, and today it's very close to the US, and by extension, it is also very close to Israel. So, what has happened in the last some 30 years or so, especially from 1992, is India has played a balancing role. It has not given up on its Palestinian position entirely, but at the same time, it is also in a full-fledged relationship with Israel. In fact, it has become one of the biggest buyers of Israeli weaponry, and it continuously. So there have been many votes in international organizations like the UN, where India will either abstain if it has to oppose Israel, or where it has to support Palestine. It sticks to its basic plan of supporting a two-state solution. So India has kind of playing a balancing role. It cannot afford to antagonize either Israel or Palestine, and at the same time, because Palestine is also the issues also it's linked to India's relationship with the Arab states, and India has very close relationship with the Arab world. So you also see Prime Minister Narendra Modi occasionally going to the Arab world, or going to the UAE, go out to Saudi Arabia, talking and having a friendly relationship with these countries, while at the same time, not entirely antagonizing Israel, even though occasionally there have been situations where India has been in a sticky situation where it has been forced to abstain. So that is India's position. It's neither here nor there, or you can call it both ways. So India plays it both ways.
Okay. So, how did Israel get recognition as a state then, and what's taken the world so long to recognize Palestinian statehood, and why are more countries wanting to, do so now?
See, if you go back into history, on May 14, 1948, was the day when the British mandate of Palestine ended and the last of the British troops left Palestine. On the very same day, the head of the Jewish agency, David Ben Gurion, declared the establishment of or the formation of a new state called Israel. And the moment he announced it, the US President, Harry S. Truman, recognized the state. So this gave a massive boost to Ben Gurion's move, which was completely done almost in secret. Very few people know that this was going to be done. And when the declaration came, there was already a pre-arranged discussion or understanding with the US, and that helped Israel to increase its chances. And 1 year later, in March of 1949, the UN Security Council also recognized Israel. The declaration of Israel as a state came at a time when there was a UN partition plan that was in its form of a proposal, and this proposal was hammered out in November 1947. This partition plan was very comfortable. There were 2-3 variations of the plan, but this was opposed by the Palestinians and the other Arab states. And the other thing that happened is the UN Security Council was to have passed this resolution, but before it was passed, Ben Gurion declared the establishment of an Israeli state unilaterally. The US supported it, and what it basically did was, in some ways, it sabotaged this whole plan. So the plan could never be taken through. And the other thing that happened is that the Palestinians opposed this partition plan, and it resulted in a war that lasted for at least 2 years, from 1947 to 49, between Israel and Palestine. So what happened is, in the chaos and in the political turmoil, the Arabs never formally got the Palestinian state recognized, as they were fighting to retrieve the land taken over by Israel, because they were still opposed to the establishment of a Jewish state in what they considered was their land. So one war followed another until 1967, when Israel occupied land that was meant for a Palestinian state. And so you had Israel occupying even in Jerusalem, that was East Jerusalem, that was meant to be a future capital of an independent Palestinian state, and it occupied Gaza and the West Bank. So basically, what the 1967 war did was, it changed the contours of the map, and it completely distorted the plan that was originally made by the United Nations. So in the process, what has happened is, talks have been going on since then. So in 73, you had one more war where Egypt and Syria fought Israel, but then again that war ended in a stalemate. There was no much benefit, and that was the last war. But in the war where the countries like Egypt and Syria took part in it. So the point here is, this confusion resulted in a kind of a stalemate and a fluidity that has not been resolved until today. There have been several rounds of discussion where there has been calls for the US to withdraw from the areas it occupied in 1967, and so it has got caught in this discussion and in a stalemate. And until today, as we speak, this issue has never got resolved. And decades have gone by. And today, the whole scenario has changed with the geopolitics of the world. The entire you had two superpowers, Cold War. So too many changes have occurred in the last 8 decades. And what it has done is that you today have an Israeli state and no Palestinian state. So it's just by the force of circumstances and events that have resulted in this. And then today we are in a situation where there is a severe crisis facing the Palestinian state and its people, as we are seeing in Gaza. So this issue of recognizing a Palestinian state and more countries joining it and asking for it, whether it's going to make a difference or not, we just need to wait and see.
Thank you for your time, sir.